So around 7 years ago, I received a really curious call from one of the largest energy companies in the world, Aramco, in fact. And this was via Georgia Tech, in fact, and they requested me to come in and to create a course and to teach about energy, and particularly about renewable energy. So as you can imagine, I was really piqued about this. I said, what would one of the largest companies in the world with over $1 billion daily revenue want to learn about energy, and particularly renewable energy? Well, much like you guys had in 2011, the vision that the changing landscape of energy had many challenges but also opportunities, and that is indeed what Aramco saw as well, that there were challenges but also opportunities in that landscape. So today I'd like to go through 5 areas. One is, what does this landscape look like? What are those opportunities? How do we really compare natural gas and renewables on kind of an equal footing, so to speak? What does ROI look like particularly? What are we seeing from a load profile, from a load structure for electric vehicles and building space? And then finally, how do we make sense of all of this in an intelligent, coherent fashion? All right, so as Nikola Tesla said back in the turn of the 20th century, one of the fathers of the electrical grid, he said, if you really want to understand the secrets of energy, or the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. So to that point, what is energy? We'll just start with that. And energy is simply the capacity to do work as measured in kilowatt hours or kBTU. So some other terms that are very important, of course, are eco-conscious, environmentally friendly, and you can read that on here. And of course, reliability, that's pivotal and very important as well. So what is renewable? It's quite simply the energy stolen from Greenprint, from the Clearwater Greenprint itself. Energy from a source that is not depleted when used. Quite simply, quite often the fuel source is free. Resiliency is the ability to a piece of infrastructure or system, environment, or community to sustain or recover its essential functions when presented with a disruption. And finally, of course, sustainability, meeting our current needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs as well. So if we look at this landscape, let's just start really simply. What does energy look like right now? In the United States, pretty much it's a very diverse energy mix right now. 34% is natural gas, 35% is oil, petroleum, and the rest consists of nuclear, coal, and renewable energy. So what we're seeing is that nuclear and coal energy generation is decreasing, and that natural gas and renewable energy generation is increasing. So if you look at this, what's called a Sankey chart, it's a flow chart essentially, not quite as scary as perhaps it looks, but 30% of all energy consumption is used within buildings. And natural gas is an integral part of that, so around 40% of all energy, or actually more or less within the United States, consists of natural gas. In fact, 40% of electric generation on average in the United States is natural gas, 75% in Florida itself. And then you see the rest made up of nuclear, coal, et cetera, et cetera. So renewables are on a significant growth trajectory, right? We all know this. So what do we do about that? Okay, and how do we harness that? Unfortunately, 2/3 of this energy is lost. So from primary source energy, from where we get it from the well or from wherever it is, unfortunately we lose 2/3 of all that energy. So there's significant opportunity there. So what I'd like to do is kind of compare, before we go into a comparison of natural gas, kind of look at this infrastructure, this grid infrastructure, both for natural gas as well as for electricity, and then kind of weave in the story of renewables and solar. And I'd like to do a fair assessment on this as well. Having seen a number of things with Aramco, I actually got an opportunity to go out to the Middle East, to Dhahran near the Emirates, and see some of these largest oil wells, as well as what they're doing in terms of renewables too. So I got a fairly balanced perspective, hopefully. So if you look at the natural gas infrastructure, it consists essentially of production, transmission, and distribution. Pretty straightforward. And as you can see right here, on the transmission side, some of that is used directly in industrial applications, but it's also used for gas power generation. And as I said, within the state of Florida, 75% is used for electric production. The rest made up of nuclear, coal, and renewables, and very little hydro, I believe. So what are our natural gas reserves right now? We have over close to 500 trillion cubic feet right here of natural gas within the U.S. itself. So 500 trillion cubic feet. These are what's called proven reserves that we know of and can access right here. We have much larger reserves as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, if you see that consumption, you'll see that some amount goes to electric power generation within the entire U.S., and a lot of it is also made up of residential and commercial and industrial, of course. So we use around 30.5 trillion cubic feet. So you can do the math quite simply. If you've got around 490 trillion cubic feet available of proven reserves, and that we are consuming around 30.5, if you do the simple math on that, you get around 16 to 17 years available within the U.S. Now, having said that, so two things I'd like to point out. First, the U.S. is around 5% of all proven reserves within the world. A lot of it is within the Middle East, within Venezuela, and Russia particularly probably has the largest reserves in the world. But the technically recoverable resources is around 2,900 trillion cubic feet. So that means it's not just the proven ones, but it's also the unproven ones too. And they're not necessarily economically viable. Even if you use that figure of 2,900 trillion cubic feet within the United States, you get around 95, 96 years of lifespan. So just to quickly overview what natural gas looks like, okay, it is certainly very cheap. It's one of the most economically viable fuels in the U.S. and in fact in the world. It has 50% of the CO2 emissions of coal. Okay? It's reliable, it's controllable. You can dispatch it whenever you need to. It has what's called a high capacity factor, which I'll get into shortly. However, it is a bit costly to store. It can be prone to explosion if not treated or handled properly. Hydraulic fracking has some issues as well, as we know about, particularly to the water table. It's not renewable in that sense. We have, as I showed, around potentially 100 years, probably less. And there are methane emissions on this. So CO2 is a greenhouse warming gas as such, a gas that a greenhouse warming potential. But methane is around 30 times more, and nitrous oxide 300 times more as well. Although the lifespan of methane is measured more in around 10 years, whereas CO2 is around 100 years or so. This chart right here is comparing the CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour in terms of generation from natural gas to all these other different types of fuels as well. So let's just shift to electric grid, and then we'll move back to another comparison between the two. So the grid, as we all know about it, and have been hearing a lot about it in the news right now with Texas, Northeast, and so on. I myself also grew up in the Northeast and also in Canada, so as we know, there have been some issues up there too in terms of grid reliability and so on. But it essentially consists of 3 or 4 things. There's generation, transmission, distribution, and finally usage by customers. If you look at that infrastructure itself, and if you look at renewables and how they might fit into that, they fit in quite nicely in terms of you've got central renewable, you could have it from a central renewable generation perspective. You can fit in renewables plus storage on the transmission. So we talked about generation, transmission, and distribution. And within the actual distribution network, at the load side, you can fit in scalable renewables as well. And of course, it allows for EV integration. We're seeing a lot of that as cities are more or less trying to electrify their fleets. So what does the solar infrastructure look like? There's PV generation, as you can see on the left side, consisting of PV arrays. There's conversion from DC to AC. There's collection, and finally putting it right onto the grid. And in terms of solar, as I said, it lends itself scalable from very small systems up to around 500 kilowatts. These are typically behind the meter distributed generation. Community scale integration, 500 kilowatts to around 20 megawatts. And then finally, very large scale systems, 20 megawatts plus. And you can see this is what it would look like, something like that. Now, if you look at something called the levelized cost of electricity, no discussion on energy is complete without understanding economics. One way to measure economics is something called LCOE, or levelized cost of electricity. That is simply the sum of all the cost over the lifetime, the OPEX and CAPEX, divided by the sum of electrical energy produced over the lifetime, typically 20 to 30 years for a lot of renewables. What we see is that in around 2009, when I was kind of starting in renewables, we saw that it was quite expensive. In fact, it was 30, 40 cents per kilowatt hour just to produce that electricity with solar. That is not economically viable. But look at the trajectory. Look what's gone on since then. It's been on a downward considerable slope, such that in around 2017 or so, or 16, it was even cheaper than natural gas. And wind has also been on a downward trajectory, wind power, but that is probably around 2020, 2021, in which solar is now cheaper than even wind. So we're now looking at 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour, or at least projected to 2040, and around 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour in terms of avoided costs. And the largest solar power plant in the world, in the Middle East, in fact, is less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Now, of course, size matters. Size definitely matters in that case. So what about small solar? Is that economically viable? And we'll get into that in a moment. So if you look at residential PV systems, you can see that the cost of installation has come down considerably too, that we're looking at around $2.70 or so per watt in terms of install, commercial $1.72 or so, average throughout the country, and less than $1 a watt for utility scale. That was kind of the magic number that NREL and other organizations said that they wanted solar to be at, and we have indeed achieved that. Grid parity, that's the key word. That's great, but solar has a big, big problem. And let's be fair about this. Something called capacity factor. And that's the ability to, the actual energy that's produced compared to the ability for that system to produce energy, or what it should be producing. In other words, if you ran it over a 24-hour period, what percentage of that period are you actually getting energy? Solar has the lowest, 24%, 24 to 25%, compared to nuclear, 93% capacity factor. Or if you look at natural gas, above 50%, 50 to 60%. So that means if you're running that plant for over a 24-hour period, you can effectively run it for more than 12 hours and get energy. You can't do that with solar. Your fuel source may be free, but unfortunately you're kind of beholden to Mother Nature. When there's no sun, you ain't got no solar, right? So as they like to say, or as I like to joke with some people, solar works great on sunshine, but unfortunately it doesn't work very well on moonshine. But there are other applications for moonshine, I'm sure. So PV overview. If we summarize PV itself, yeah, it's very cheap. Absolutely. It's now the cheapest form of creating new energy. In fact, a lot of utilities are installing solar. In fact, it's the largest growth trajectory in the U.S. In terms of new installs. 5% of CO2 of coal, as opposed to 50% for natural gas. Minimal O&M, your operations and maintenance cost is quite low. It has now the lowest LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. There is minimal to no air water impact. It's renewable, is free fuel, but it's got a problem. It's not controllable. It's not dispatchable. If you're a utility, one of the most important things for you as a utility is steady the ship, steady as she goes. You want a level curve, so a straight line. Utilities like to be boring. Boring is good. Reliability is good. So it has, unfortunately, it's not reliable, it's not controllable. It has the lowest capacity factor. Okay, can we do something about that? Here is a bit of an eye chart, and you guys can have a look at it later on. It's just comparing with a little bit more detail. But the key points here are natural gas is a fabulous base load. It works, it's reliable. It has issues, though, that we know about. What can we do? Enter solar. Can help mitigate some of those issues in terms of emissions, in terms of environmental impact. But unfortunately, solar by itself is not controllable. The key word is dispatchable. A utility wants something that's controllable and dispatchable. If you look at capacity-weighted construction costs, they're more or less in line with each other now. To create a new plant, costs with natural gas versus solar is more or less the same. And if you look at utility scale, levelized cost of electricity, solar is in fact cheaper. That's utility scale, understandably. So we did some modeling here at McKim & Creed. We took a 100 kilowatt system and a 300 kilowatt system. And we did some return on investment. Okay, so we've used some industry standard tools, and we can certainly do a lot more of this as well. And this was something called System Advisor Model, a tool that can look at economics. So you can vary the cost of construction. Looking at that right here for a 100 kilowatt system, we saw, by the way, based on your assumptions, discounted rate, whether you take on any debt or not, whether you own the system, whether it's a PPA, etc. All of that can be done. So I did one basic one for 100 kilowatt. I'm seeing around 8.6 years simple payback for a 100 kilowatt system. Now, granted, that would be a little bit more based on the cost of installation. So I used around $1.72 a watt with no incentives. But if we're looking at $2, $2.25 or whatever, we're still looking at around under 10 years or so for 100 kilowatts. So this is a commercial PV system on a rooftop, let's say. The levelized cost of electricity, real, is 5.4 cents per kilowatt hour. That's not too shabby. That's not too shabby. And as the system grows larger, as you install a larger system, you're looking at around 5.3 cents or whatever. Now, I really would like to do this on a case-by-case basis. So, and again, but this gives you an idea about ballpark in terms of commercial systems. Utility scale systems are even cheaper. We're looking at well under 3 cents per kilowatt hour, whether it's Duke Energy, Georgia Power, PG&E, whatever. They are doing solar massively. But so are commercials, industrial and commercial clients as well. There's got to be a reason why they're doing that. Let's just shift gears, so to speak, to looking at the motor vehicle infrastructure, the electrification of the fleet. If you look at well-to-wheel efficiency and look at petrol or gasoline vehicles, you're looking at an overall 13% efficiency. So while you have a pretty good refining efficiency and so on for oil, you're looking around 80%. But by the moment it goes to the wheel itself, there's a tremendous amount of loss. So you've got 60% efficiency there for an aggregate of 13%. Electric vehicles have a main advantage, even though the grid, I should say, is not that efficient, unfortunately. You're looking at 31% efficiency from generation loss and transmission loss. The vehicle itself is 76% efficient, or more or less. So an overall 23% efficiency. In the reference slides, which we have shared with you as well, you'll also see what it looks like from natural gas. What about if you were to just burn that natural gas directly for compressed natural gas vehicles? What about hydrogen? So there are various figures of merit there too. You're still looking at electric vehicles being more efficient. It's the laws of thermodynamics, the Carnot heat cycle, versus the laws of electromagnetics. electricity, when used directly, not for heating purposes, is just far more efficient. But when you burn fuels, they are more efficient for doing so, but not so much for conversion necessarily to electricity or for direct final use at the load level or appliance level. So, but what about if you change that picture to use renewables instead? So the internal combustion engine using gasoline, as we said, is around 13% efficient. The electric vehicle, when using solar or renewables, because there are less transmission losses, that figure from 23% jumps up to 74%. What about full tailpipe emissions, the cost for creating batteries, the cost for creating motors and so on. If you look at that, you're still seeing, in terms of long tailpipe emissions, less than half for, let's say, an electric vehicle like the Tesla, an all-American made vehicle, Tesla Model 3, versus an average gasoline car. A hybrid car sits in between there like a plug-in Prius or the like. So, having said all that, we've looked at the issues with natural gas, we've looked at the issues with solar, we've looked at the opportunities with natural gas, the pros and cons, and also the opportunities with solar. What can we do to kind of combine all this together? Well, I would say the first thing is energy efficiency. The best use of energy is no use of energy at all, right? We would be remiss to forget about energy efficiency. In fact, I was just on a panel, hosting a panel 2-3 weeks ago with the Association of Energy Engineers, and we had Dr. Marilyn Brown, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2009, I believe, and her comment was, energy efficiency is the first fuel. The first fuel. Energy efficiency is the least cost energy resource, and this wedge, what we've done over the last 10, 20, 30 years, we've saved more by better appliances, using more energy efficiency than all of new construction or new energy creation. It is a fabulous wedge. So efficiency through equipment upgrades and strategies. So right sizing, right timing. When do you put those energy efficiency measures in place? And I'm happy to see that in Greenprint, you do talk about that in the revised Greenprint. There's discussion of that. So education, awareness, behavioral changes, all of those are integral to part of this energy efficiency. Then also right equipment, and doing so at the right time. If you combine all of that together, you have low-cost efficiency strategies combined with equipment upgrades and behavioral changes, and then you couple in clean energy generation. Then you've got a potent solution. But that's still not enough. That doesn't solve the problem of renewables. They're not dispatchable. You have issues as such. In fact, California, which has been aggressive in solar in the nation, leading the charge, has also seen a lot of issues. Well, why is their grid still not functioning fine? If solar's so great, what's going on here? Okay? Well, they coined that term back in 2013, something called the duck curve. This shape right here resembles a duck, meaning that solar is generating energy during the day. But that's not necessarily when you need it the most. So you have a bit of an issue right here. And what is a nightmare for every utility is this ramp. This ramp is quite painful. So within 3 hours, utilities, such as in California, have to ramp up 13,000 megawatts, I should say, in terms of power delivery. That means they have to bring online those natural gas, those combined heat transfer, combined cycle natural gas plants, all of those very quickly. And they're not designed to respond to that. So solar is actually causing grief and problems, as much as it's a touted, fantastic source. But we got to do something about this. Every cloud has a silver lining, of course, right? There is no silver bullet, but there are other silver things we can use, perhaps. Okay. So if you look at this, this is what's going on. You're creating energy during the time this is not necessarily from midnight. Oh, actually, here it is, yeah. Over a 24-hour period, you've got creating energy, but what you could do perhaps is store it. You could store it and dispatch it. Now you can bring control into the picture. That's what you ultimately need, is control, a means of regulation. Power is great, but power without regulation and control ain't worth anything, so to speak, to coin a phrase. So energy storage, that landscape is changing. What we saw in wind started over 15, 20 years ago, and prices dropped. Solar, that evolution started more or less 10 years ago, and prices dropped dramatically. We're now seeing the same thing over the last 2 years for energy storage. So most of energy storage is pumped hydro in the United States, but the rest consists of thermal storage and batteries, electrochemical batteries, flywheels, even compressed air systems as well. That's what it looks like right here. We're still looking at 90% plus on terms of pumped hydro, but the rest of that puzzle is expanding, allowing distributed energy storage systems rather than just centralized. So it's a little bit hard to read right here, but essentially what I'm trying to convey right here is with this evolution of energy storage from pumped hydro and compressed air systems that take time to respond. They cannot surely respond in that 2-3 hour period. To some extent they can, that California needs in order to fix up that curve. But now companies like Tesla, Zonan Battery, and many others are installing large solar systems, large energy systems. In fact, Elon Musk promised the government in South Australia 100 days where it's free, and he delivered on that, 100 megawatt hour system. And I think it was in Queensland or southwest north in Australia. What energy storage, the new type of energy storage that can do, it can respond quickly. So it can respond to address things like regulation, voltage stability, power quality, all these things that utilities are looking to make our grid stable. We have an issue, let's face it. We're seeing it in Texas, we're seeing it in the Northeast, we're seeing it all over the place. We need to make this grid stable one way or another, right? We need reliability, we cannot suffer outages. Reliability has to be coupled, or rather sustainability has to be coupled with reliability and resiliency. We just can't have sustainability on its own. We need reliability, we need resiliency. And energy storage is a means to address that. But let's step back even more so, and let's put in smarts. Something called a microgrid. It scales up, whether it's small on a commercial level or large, has the ability to basically, what is a microgrid? It's a means of creating a power system with intelligence locally that combines together, that's in a well-defined boundary, that combines together smart loads, renewable power systems, including turbine and natural gas power systems and energy storage, in a comprehensive fashion that can both connect and disconnect with the grid. It's intelligence, it's sexy intelligence with control and all the resources to bear that we've talked about. It's digitized, it's decentralized, it's decarbonized, and it's electric. And it answers that call that I said before. You can't have sustainability without resiliency and reliability. So the value of microgrids is just as I said, because it's localized and distributed. And in fact, utilities are working on it. I worked on one with Duke Energy in North Carolina, the Hot Springs microgrid near Asheville. So there are many utilities and companies that are now involved in doing microgrids because it makes sense and it's more and more economically viable. Here's a case in point. A friend of mine, Byron Washam from University of San Diego, is a director of the largest microgrid in the United States that serves 45,000 people, 450 buildings. 85% of electricity is used on campus, and it consists of a 13 megawatt natural gas turbine, 3 megawatt solar PV, etc., etc. and 2.5 megawatt advanced energy storage system, as well as 125 electric vehicle chargers. So I gave him a call a few days ago, and I said, so Byron, how's it going? He said, fantastic, we're expanding it. It is now cheaper to create our own energy than to take it from the utility. In fact, we even help the utility by feeding back some of that energy, especially in times of crises. We need resiliency, we need reliability, but we also need sustainability. There's natural gas cogeneration on site, solar resources, everything combined together. A building that I worked on the Georgia Tech campus a few years ago is called the Living Building, and it is 34,000 square foot, and I was very happy to look at from the load side when I went back to school and also my background is electrical engineering, but I also went back to do a degree in architecture, and particularly in high performance buildings, because I really wanted to understand, how do you use that energy? It's great that we engineers love to create energy, but you need to complete that circle and understand its usage. This building is a living testament in Atlanta, Georgia. 340 kilowatt PV system that produces more than 40% of its energy. Not everybody would agree, necessarily from an aesthetics perspective, that having a canopy on the top of the building is the most pleasing. I happen to like it, but it does work effectively, and it also has a green garden on top as well, on the roof itself, and provides shade to the building too. So this building truly combines all of this together, from energy storage, photovoltaics, a chill plant as well, which is fed by on campus. So if we were to do an energy feasibility study, what would it look like? And it would look like this. To understand what the needs are, to understand where you are right now, take stock, understand the building stock right now, look at the operational challenges, look at what is going well for you. Don't just come in and propose all these solutions, but understand what is actually going very well for you right now. Identify the opportunities. What are the business models that really work right here? Do a sensitivity, environmental impact and risk analysis, sensitivity analysis, and look at the roadmap going forward. So in summary, I'd like to summarize to say that there are 6 things that will get us to a sustainable, resilient, and reliable future. And that is, look at natural gas as a vital baseload to achieve what we want to achieve. It's reliable, it's dispatchable, it's controllable. Look at energy efficiency strategies, right equipment, right sizing, right timing. Integrate controls and intelligence. Look at cost-effective solar PV systems. You've seen some of the ROI. Look at the opportunities for energy storage. And finally, learn from what people have been doing in terms of microgrids and integration. Thank you very much.